Alwa's Awakening is a trip down the memory lane of retro metroidvania games. While it may not do anything particularly new with the genre or the level design, Alwa's Awakening for all intents and purposes is a game that could have been released back in 1986. In that sense, it has a level of charm to it that's admirable, but doesn't necessarily blow my mind away either. Alwa's was once a beautiful world covered in stunning nature. Sadly, this was all disrupted by a mystical being named Vikar who began to enslave the innocent people living there. With his powers, he formed a group of protectors to seek out the ornaments, the only thing left protecting Alwa's. Just when all hope was lost, a girl named Zoe appears from another world to stop Vikar and redeem this land that finds itself in disarray. The tale is one that's seemingly familiar with other games in the genre. You're the chosen one that has to collect some sort of relics to become powerful enough to stop the big boss. It's nothing new that really deviates from other games like it, with very little dialogue throughout the entire campaign. It's a passable story that isn't necessarily the reason to play this game, but is just enough to give the gameplay some sort of context. Alwa's Awakening is a side-scrolling Metroidvania game with every detail of the genre that comes with it. You'll control Zoe as she explores dungeons and villages looking for new powers that will then open up new paths for her to explore. The control scheme, just like the look of the game, feels like it was ripped out from the 80s. You control Zoe using a D-pad, get her to jump with the B button, and activate her magic staff with the Y button. Through a variation of these buttons, you can also perform other types of magic attacks that you unlock throughout the game. It's something that you could quite literally play with an NES controller. In terms of platforming, Zoe moves rather slow compared to a lot of other popular platformers of the past. She feels a bit floaty, like if Little Big Planet had an NES port in an alternate universe. It's something I had to get used to, as it was easy for me to miss jumps and just fall into pits in the level design. Speaking of which, the design of dungeons expand both vertically and horizontally as they should with the genre, but surprisingly there wasn't a ton of death or spike pits to fall into that caused immediate death. More often than not, hazardous pits would only just knock out one of the 3 health bars I had, so in that sense it was quite forgiving. Any other time I'd just fall into a lower section of a dungeon that I was already in and just have to backtrack. Although that could easily become annoying after a few times just because the slow movement also meant that backtracking and platforming was extra slow. It could make the platforming parts of the game feel like a drag. The platforming does get expanded a bit with the use of magic powers that you unlock throughout the game. There's 3 main ones that you can use in a variety of different ways. For example, one of the spells gives you the ability to summon a green block. This block can then be used to raise you up a platform, block projectile attacks, or just activate switches. The spells are quite versatile and they expand in use the deeper you get into the game. That type of game design felt clever, especially in one of the earlier boss fights that ends up pushing you to use the green blocks as a battle mechanic, where it was primarily being used as a platforming mechanic up until then. The small number of spells felt limiting at first, but the different uses for them made the 9-hour campaign experience feel like the most clever it ever had. Every one of the boss fights, despite their challenge, felt like treats to me because of it. In the end, the gameplay wasn't inspired by games of the past, but instead was like a game from the past, bringing along all the charm and the frustrations with it. Where games like The Messenger and Shovel Knight tried to take inspiration from classics and then warp them into some modern gameplay mechanics for some sort of weird hybrid, Alwa's Awakening is more of a true representation of the past. Depending on the player, that can be something you're looking forward to or something that you're just tired of seeing in indie games. For me personally, like games that haven't aged too well, I found some aspects of the gameplay, like the use of spells, to be well done. However, the platforming speed of everything certainly made parts of the game feel too sluggish for my liking. Alwa's Awakening does its best to stay within the boundaries of what the NES was capable of. It does get a few liberties with the amount of colors it can display at once, but in terms of the animation and the art direction, it completely fits the style of games from the 80s. The little character avatars look adorable and almost chibi-like because of their heads taking up half their body proportion. It was always humorous to see them sort of wobble about, especially with the floaty nature of the gameplay. Playing the Nintendo Switch version of this for review, I also found the gameplay to scale well between the Switch's display and my own 4K TV. While I personally tend to prefer a lot more animation in simple retro games like this, Alwa's does seem to really want to cater to the feeling of a game of the past. In this case, that includes some of the technical limitations that came from that era too. Complementing the retro art style of the game is a soundtrack composed by Robert Kreis. Robert specializes in creating chiptune music in his free time, and it shows in his work here. Robert's music fell right in line with that sense of adventure you get when you embark on a new journey. It was memorable enough for me to want to look up his name after I finished the game. As for the sound effects of the game, they too felt like they were ripped out of the 80s, lending over to that classic theme that this game is presented in. It may be simple, but to its credit, it's well done for the aesthetic direction that Alwa's Awakening is going for. Ultimately, Alwa's Awakening is a good Metroidvania game that delivers a mostly solid experience across the board. Despite some blemishes in the platforming, it succeeds in its mission to create a fun blast from the past. With that said, it doesn't try to do anything new in a genre that's getting increasingly more saturated every single day. It's that last note that makes this game a good choice to pick up, but doesn't make it stand out among the other great Metroidvania games out there already that I've reviewed. If I had to give this a score, I'd give Alwa's Awakening an 8 out of 10. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share the video with your friends. It helps more people find out about my videos, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you all very much for watching, hope you guys have a great day, and keep on gaming.